Alrighty, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our second seminar for the Diane Goldman Kemper and Robin Kemper Multiple Sclerosis Wellness Series. I have the privilege of introducing Dr. Wendy Suzuki. Dr. Suzuki is a professor of neuroscience and psychology at New York University. Her research focuses on studying areas of the brain that are important for our memory and attention. She is an expert in brain plasticity, which is the brain's ability to change in response to its environment. More recently, her work has focused on understanding how aerobic exercise can be used to improve learning, memory, and higher cognitive abilities in humans. She is also an author who is passionate about exercise, teaching, and supporting and mentoring up-and-coming scientists. Please help me welcome Dr. Suzuki.
Thank you. It is such a pleasure to be here at my uptown neighbors. I'm Dean of the College of Arts and Science at New York University and professor of neuroscience and psychology. So it's always fun to come and visit another institution, especially one with such a beautiful building. I don't think I've ever been here before. So thank you for the invitation. And you've invited me to here today to talk about one of my very favorite topics that I get to talk about, which is the really transformative effects of exercise in the brain. And I love this because it is something that everybody is able to do, at all levels of movement. You can still move your body a little bit. And so we're going to talk about what exactly that is doing for your brain health, what it means as we age, and what you can do today to get more movement into your life. But first, I want to kind of introduce you to the topic that really got me into neuroscience, got me into this area, which is the topic of brain plasticity. You've probably all heard about it. It is the ability, the amazing ability of the human brain to modify, rewire, and change its circuitry. Think about that. Can your heart change its circuitry? Can the atrium not be connected to all of its inputs, but suddenly become the ventricle? No. But the brain has a lifelong ability to learn and change and grow, also to shrink sometimes, and that is brain plasticity. And I always like to illustrate it in this way, that sometimes you need a little help. Maybe a brain needs some self-actualization. So we'll just picture it like this. And brain plasticity says that with certain kinds of experiences, even a brain that starts out like this can turn into a big fat fluffy brain like this with all the great brain areas that you would ever want. That's called positive brain plasticity, and that's what I've really focused on. However, we're fighting against the equal and opposite, because what goes up can also come down. And so the big fat fluffy brain that you see on the right with other kinds of experiences that you might be familiar with, I certainly am familiar with, can revert back to the unself-actualized brain on the left, and that's called negative brain plasticity. And you can guess what some of the most common forms of this negative brain plasticity. Anybody have a little stress in their life? Anybody have a little anxiety in their life? Particularly chronic stress and anxiety are one of the most common forms of negative brain plasticity. However, the good news is one of the most common forms of positive brain plasticity is movement, moving your body. This is the reason why I became so interested in this topic of brain plasticity. I walked into Marion Diamond's class the very first day of my freshman year at UC Berkeley. Can you tell which one she is? Okay, yeah. So here she is in the 1960s with the team that literally discovered adult brain plasticity. And here's the elegant experiment that she did. At that time, in the 1960s, the idea was, yes, there's lots of change, lots of growth during development, but once you hit adulthood, no more change. Eventually, you can kind of lose synapses when you get older, but there's no change because there was no evidence for change. And Marion and her colleagues said, I'm not sure that's true. I think there is a lot of capacity for change. And so she did a simple but elegant experiment to ask, can the adult human brain, not the human brain, but the rodent brain in her case, change? And she said, what is the best thing that I can do that might really increase this ability of learning and growth? And she came up with this idea of an enriched environment, which you can think of as the Disney World of rat cages. So she raised rats in this, I didn't bring a picture this time, but imagine a 2-story rat cage with toys and lots of other rats and lots of toys to play with, and they get changed out all the time. She let those rats, a group of those rats, live in that Disney World of rat cages for several months, and their randomized controlled brother and sister rats lived in a small environment, no toys, maybe just one other rat there. And if there was no change in the brain, there would be absolutely no difference in the Disney World rats and the shoebox rats. Well, when they looked at this, and Marion was a neuroanatomist, so she used her tool. She measured the thickness, the number of synapses in the brain. And here's what she found, that environmental enrichment, that Disney World of rat cages, she actually found the cortex grew in the environmentally enriched rats. Oh my gosh, and not in all areas, but in areas that made sense with what these rats were doing in the Disney World of rat cages. They were running around. Oh, motor cortex got thicker. They had a lot of visual and somatosensory touch kind of stimulation. They found increases in neurotransmitter levels. The only neurotransmitter that was discovered at that time, acetylcholine. That levels of acetylcholine were shown to be increased in the enriched environment brains. More synapses, those connections between individual neurons, she found increased in the rats that were in the enriched environment. Angiogenesis is the birth of brand new blood vessels. So you get even more infusion of oxygenated blood in your brain with this enriched environment. The other exciting thing that they found was that if you raise rats in enriched environments, this was found later, not in the 60s, but later, that not only do you get all these really great things, kind of a bigger, fatter, fluffier brain, but if you look at this beautiful structure in the middle of the rat brain, which is called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is my favorite brain structure. I spent 25 years of my career studying the functions of this beautiful kind of C-shaped structure. It goes here, and all along here is part of the hippocampus as well. What does it do? It helps us learn and remember new facts and events. Okay, so basically all the cool things that we need to remember, my name. If you remember my name, my face, what my voice sounds like, that is because you have a working hippocampus. We call it declarative memory. So now you know why the hippocampus is so important. You want it working. And here's what they found. Environmental enrichment literally grows new neurons in the hippocampus. That's what hippocampal neurogenesis means. Not throughout the hippocampus, only in this part of the hippocampus called the dentate gyrus. Okay, I just told you what the hippocampus does. How many of you want shiny new hippocampal cells in your dentate gyrus? I do. Okay, so you need to get some environmental enrichment. And so how do we do that? Well, let me give you a real cartoon of what an enriched rat environment looks like. This is really what it is, lots of toys and rats to play around. A colleague of mine, Henriette von Prague, asked, what was it about the rats, what was it about this enriched environment that were causing all of these brain changes that she and Marion Diamond and so many others were exploring? And so she systematically explored, was it the toys? Was it the play? So what she found was there was a single factor that caused the vast majority of all of those positive brain changes in this enriched environment. What was it? It was the running wheel. All you needed to do was give these rats access to this running wheel. This is the key factor. So that means Marion and her colleagues started this whole line of research showing environmental enrichment changes brain structure. Henriette von Prague showed actually exercise, that movement that rats are getting, in this case on the running wheel, causes all these same changes, including increased hippocampal neurogenesis. So now the problem is a little bit easier. You don't have to go to Disney World to try and get these changes. You need to get more movement into your life. And I set about asking the simplest question, the question that I wanted to know. In fact, the question that so many of my people that come to my talk want to know, how do I get a bigger, fatter hippocampus myself? And so the question that I'm going to go over for the rest of the talk is, what is the effective dose of either acute exercise? By acute, I mean a single bout of exercise, or long-term exercise. How much do I have to change my movement in my life to get all those effects I was just telling you about? Okay, so what do we know about what's happening in your brain right after you work out? Here we see there are increases in a whole bunch of neurochemicals. What this shows is that every single time you move your body, you're giving your brain a bubble bath of neurochemicals. The most common result in these exercise sessions is improved mood. Even a single exercise bout can decrease anxiety and depression levels across the board. The second most common finding is improved focus and attention after a single exercise bout. Why is that? Well, the prefrontal cortex uses dopamine as the neurotransmitter. And so the thought is that that is helping prefrontal cortex work better. And the third thing that is improving after a single exercise bout from many, many different studies is your motor reaction time. You're better at answering questions. You answer them more quickly after an exercise bout. Studies have shown that just 10 minutes of walking is effective at improving mood. That is, it decreases depression, decreases anxiety levels. 10 minutes of walking. And now I want to ask, well, what if I bring more exercise into my life? So we're going to look at long-term exercise, the effects of long-term exercise. And the first group we'll look at it is in low-fit, healthy adults, okay? And so what do I mean? So there were 44 in this study, 27 exercise groups, and 27 in the exercise group, 17 in the control group. They were between the ages of 35 and 59 years old, and they were sedentary, low fit. And so for the exercise group, they took a bunch of cognitive tests. You won't be surprised. We tested mood, we tested prefrontal function, focused attention, we tested a range of hippocampal functions. And then after we tested them, we asked them to exercise for 3 times a week at Swerve Fitness for 12 weeks. For our control group, we ended up deciding on competitive video Scrabble. So same thing, we tested them cognitively. They came in 3 times a week for 12 weeks and played competitive video Scrabble, and then we tested them again at the end. The first big finding was that compared to competitive video Scrabble, spin class gives you a much higher heart rate. So this was our big finding. Here's the heart rate for competitive video Scrabble. Heart rate was much higher. So yes, our subjects were working out, no question about that. What did we find for the other measures? We had a significant difference between the two groups in weight loss. So which wasn't anything that we tried to control, but there was significantly more weight loss in the exercise group compared to the video game group. What about mood? So here's where we got significant improvements in positive affect in the exercise group relative to the video Scrabble group. Motivation to exercise was much higher. So it turns out the more you exercise, the more motivated you are to exercise. We were not the first ones to show that, but that was a clear finding in our study. And once you've been exercising, doing that spin class for 12 weeks, you have a much more positive body attitude. Stroop test is one of the classic tests that requires you to shift and focus your attention. We got significant better performance on the Stroop test in the exercise group relative to the control group, and on two different kinds of measures of memory that is dependent on the hippocampus and related structures. We got significant improvement on recognition memory. That is, recognition is, I've seen you, I saw you when I first came into the room, I recognize you. That is recognition memory. Spatial episodic memory is highly dependent on the hippocampus. That performance on a task that it was kind of a Doom-like task where they had to go into a virtual environment and learn a new town, that performance on that task was better. So this was exciting, and it suggests that 12 weeks of exercise when you're low fit will increase these three major measures: mood and focus and spatial hippocampal memory. So last set of studies before conclusion. What about moderately fit subjects? People are already doing a little bit of exercise. They worked and they're trying to do it. What do they have to do to actually see a benefit? This was a study that we did with another spin studio, and we had 80 subjects, 39 exercisers, 41 controls, between the ages of 25 and 59. They were already going to or just joined Ride Fitness. We ended up with an exercise group that we asked to up their exercise. So they were exercising on average 2 times a week. We invited them to exercise up to 7 times a week. And we did that again for 12 weeks. And then we cognitively tested them later. Our control group stayed at 1 to 2 times a week. And so what did we find there? Well, we got also mood improvements, negative affect, that is depression, anxiety, decreased. Exercise motivation increased as you went up in number of exercise sessions. Also, body attitudes increased. And we got our biggest improvements in these hippocampal functions as you increased your exercise over within a week. We got spatial memory and episodic memory scores were significantly better the more you worked out in this group. To remind us what the question was, we really wanted to look at what is the effective dose. What can I tell people? What can doctors tell their patients? Not just exercise. How much do you have to exercise? What exactly does it do for your brain? So this is our final kind of analysis that we've done so far. Acute exercise, a single bout of exercise, that's how to interpret acute exercise. You get great mood effects. What about low fit? Well, with 3 months of increased exercise, 2 to 3 times a week, that's what, in the end, that's what they ended up doing. You get the mood improvement, you get focused improvements and recognition and spatial memory. And so the kind of effective dose for a low fit person to start seeing behavioral benefits, mood benefits, prefrontal, hippocampal benefits, 2 to 3 times of aerobic workouts for 12 weeks. And for the mid-fit people, what we found was 4+ aerobic exercise a week. So when you start with 2, 4 a week is what we're seeing has the most positive effects. And the other kind of take home is what we found from that mid-fit workout, I like to tell people, is that every drop of sweat counted. Did the people that went up to 6 or 7 times a week, did they generally do better than the ones that were at 4 or 5? Yes, they did. So the more you work out, the more you're getting these benefits. And so the other thing I like to emphasize is it's doable. You get it immediately. this is not, this is not the bottom line is go run a marathon. That's the only way. Come on, let's start training 2 to 3 times a week of a workout. These are 45-minute workouts. Get your heart rate up. Am I saying that you could only do spin? No, absolutely. I think that the key thing here is the aerobic nature of these workouts. We know that is very, very effective for these brain changes. And then every drop of sweat counts. It is helpful as you get up to these higher levels. So I love this. This is motivational. This gives us kind of the, starting to give us a little bit of the minimum effective dose that we can get. So that is my message for tonight. And just leaves me to thank you very much for your attention.